Hello and welcome to the podcast. Could you recover your Bitcoin without your provider? Now, this is a new twist on a similar question to last week, which was really around, what happens if I'm no longer around? Can my family, my loved ones access my Bitcoin? But this is more focused on, well, hang on, what happens if part of the tech stack that I'm using is no longer around? And it's a huge question. So I'll remind you, could you recover your Bitcoin? And this is a question to anyone listening. Could you recover your Bitcoin without your provider? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, it depends what kind of Bitcoin custody you've gone for. Are you owning Bitcoin in true multisig self-custody, which is what I would always advocate for if you own Bitcoin in size and you're keen on reducing single points of failure, but you might be using a multisig provider like a Nunchuck or an Unchained or a Thea, or shout out to Daniel, who's launched Guard Block recently. There's lots of providers, but what happens if those platforms are no longer around? Can you rebuild the wallet somewhere else using Bitcoin's native open source design? And just, have you thought this through? Because it seems so straightforward, doesn't it? I'm going to set up my Bitcoin in self-custody, but then what happens if part of that tech stack suddenly doesn't appear? And I'm going to frame this episode with, what I get out of this is a question and some of the things that have happened to me, even in recent times, asking this to myself. But I asked Bitcoin Twitter some questions recently, and I'm just going to pull up the tab. So if you own meaningful Bitcoin, which worries you more? A 50% drawdown in price, or B, you lose access to it? And as it stands today, 47 comments, and they're so interesting. I'll run through some more of those in a minute, but just to kind of tease out what this episode's all about, it's like a lot of people have thought about this, but have you actually tested what happens in a scenario where that is actually the case? And what does it all mean? How safely can you sleep at night? So I'll repeat the question. Could you recover your Bitcoin without your provider? And to go through these comments on Twitter, I mean, basically everyone went for the second option, which is, I'm absolutely terrified of losing access. And it said, one comment was great. It's like, well, option A is you've lost 50% of the value, but option B, you've lost 100%. It's like, yeah, great point. And you're like, okay, well, and what are some of the specific examples? Well, here, Michael Bright, clearly option B. I remember that feeling when my ledger was asking if I want to restore from a passphrase or create a new wallet. And I read something like that, and it's like my heart slightly flutters too. He was like, yes, I was completely shaking, hardly managed to press the buttons, but thankfully it did work. Luke Parker, how is this even a question? 100% of people who own meaningful amount of corn have already sat on it through a couple of 50% drawdowns and stacked like crazy during them. Losing access to them is literally their worst nightmare. And of course, I'll link this thread. It's well worth going through. But Vintage Fella B, definitely access. Bitcoin can fall and rise into oblivion, but access is what makes this even worthwhile to care about or to worry about in part A. Sorry, I'll reread that. So he's obviously choosing option B, but definitely access is the one that he cares about. So BTC can fall and rise into oblivion, but access is what makes this even worthwhile to worry about in part A. Yeah, so the price action of Bitcoin, you only worry about that if you've solved part B. Now, I'm not going to go through and quote all of these, but there were some great things. Like here's another one. So J2Day, in his case, he's not worried about either option. He's worried about KYC Bitcoin and the ability to use or lose that data by our government, mainly concerned about the 61A2 and or a wrench attack. Great point. So in that sense, he actually cares about point B. So it's not neither, is it? But these are big points. Like in Australia at the moment, there is an ongoing debate happening at the very highest levels of parliament with the in-power political party doing deals with other cross parties in order to push through higher taxes. It's like, suddenly you're going to owe the government of Australia 33% every time you make a capital gain on your Bitcoin. Is that really any different to saying, okay, we're actually going to confiscate all gold from the populace? Like, they're still taking value, which wasn't the case or set of rules previously. Anyway, let me not go. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I could go through all of these. As I said, 47 comments and counting. But the point is have you asked this question? Could you recover your Bitcoin without your provider? And just throwing it out there on Twitter for a second, or X, sorry, many people are like, well, obviously losing access is the absolute worst case scenario. And so let me frame this slightly. So I recently came across a situation where I realized my own custody wasn't as shipshape as it should have been. And where I'd gone wrong is a fringe issue in that it's very unlikely to happen. But the multisig platform that I've been using now for 5 years, within it, I can create vaults. And when you create a new vault, the way to recreate that vault, if the multisig provider was not there today, there's a open source tool that they happily share saying, okay, you can go and use this software, follow this guide, you'll be able to rebuild your multisig wallet somewhere else if we went bankrupt and disappeared tomorrow. But to do that, you have to have the derivation path. Now, I don't want to get super technical here. It's something I've had to learn by doing. You can figure it out, don't worry. It's just part of the process. But the point is I had set up a Bitcoin treasure map, or what I'm now calling the family Bitcoin plan, shared it with whoever was necessary, was comfortable with my multi-sig setup, but then in hindsight realized that once it was set up, I'd actually created another vault, and that vault wasn't documented in the plan. And the point is, so the plan's changed slightly, and I haven't had my access document updated in the very difficult scenario in which the multi-sig provider is no longer around. And what would happen in that case? Well, thankfully it's not become reality, but it does give you the heebie-jeebies. It's like, whoa, that's a serious chunk of value sitting in there that I thought I'd stored safely. But in the very unlikely scenario that multi-sig provider's disappeared and you have to recreate the wallet elsewhere, if you don't have those derivation paths, what happens? And these are why we ask these questions, right? I'm holding value, I'm storing wealth, I'm being my own bank. Bitcoin is the tool to do this. Volatility, as per this tweet that I put out and the comments underneath, is absolutely secondary to certainty on custody or certainty on access or reduction of risk against lack of access. So I had an uncomfortable moment, and that's someone that's been storing Bitcoin in self-custody for at least half a decade with multi-sig, and prior to that, another half a decade with single sig. And it's uncomfortable. It really does make you go, oh, that's not part of the plan. Let's hope to God that doesn't happen. The good news is that with a bit of spring cleaning, with a plan in place, with specifically the family Bitcoin plan that I can produce for you, you don't have to worry about these things, because I've made the mistake before, essentially, and that's now squared away. So not only is it a case of like, okay, audit where you're at, what's your portfolio allocation to Bitcoin, how are you set up physically? If you're traveling a lot, or if you live in a very much like a fixed residence, there's different ways of doing things, and therefore it's very bespoke for each person. But if your system changes, or if your situation changes, then your custody backup plans also need to change with that. So it's really, I guess, like a process of, it may be simple, but you've got to make sure that it remains simple such that the cost of getting it wrong doesn't go up. And so self-custody, it's not a destination, it's a process, and it's constantly evolving. And you've got to have periodic reviews. And that's why when I've created these family Bitcoin plans, I also have at least an annual review. Now, bespoke to the person, maybe they want more quarterly, or maybe they want to have coaching sessions with their partner or their kids, or however it might want to be set up. Anything is possible. So now I really want to talk about, like, okay, this is to dive into a little bit more on the technicals here of like the derivation path that I touched on. So self-custody, it's like all things in life, self-custody of Bitcoin is on a scale or a spectrum. And I'm actually going to create a piece of content around this in terms of mapping out the ecosystem and where I see it today. And if you think about it like this, like okay, the first step that someone's going to take is they're going to move their dollars, their pounds, their yen, whatever it might be, euros, onto a crypto exchange, and they're going to buy some Bitcoin. And they more often than not, they just sit it there, right? It's sitting on Coinbase or wherever. But essentially, that is an IOU that crypto exchange has for you. And they go, oh, you've got one Bitcoin sitting there. But really, that Bitcoin's pooled with a bunch of other Bitcoin and perhaps has been leveraged against. Who knows how it's been rehypothecated? You carry crypto exchange risk when you leave your Bitcoin there. And so I would always advocate for self-custody. Some people find it easier to go for an ETF because they just want the price exposure. But an ETF like BlackRock is custodying the Bitcoin somehow. And again, the ETF's an IOU. Maybe you want to get exposure to Bitcoin with a Bitcoin treasury company like a MicroStrategy. You might do that because the capital you're in control of is in a retirement account and you can't physically buy Bitcoin in self-custody because of how it's regulated. There'll be funds out there that have that same problem as well. But the first step is, right, okay, we've got to go to self-custody. So for the average retail investor that I might speak to, whether they're high net wealth or whatever, set up a wallet, move your Bitcoin there from the exchange. Now, have you got that wallet just on your phone? You require simply a passcode and a seed phrase, or maybe you've got a hardware wallet and you've written down the seed phrase and you have a single sig, or maybe you've got more advanced and you've then got a multisig and you've got geographically dispersed keys. You might have ended up getting lured in by one of the multiple options that now exist for collaborative custody or corporate custody, such as like an on-ramp, right? No one actually holds a key except for a bunch of companies, or collaborative custody where a trusted advisor might have one of your 2 of 3 keys, or you've built your own multisig yourself. Something like a Nunchuck does this very well. I also really like the idea of the insured option that AnchorWatch uses. So that there's lots and lots of different ways, but essentially these are all different forms of Bitcoin on a spectrum. And you go from super convenient through to super secure, or extremely well protected through to not too well protected. And it's up to you how you want to store it. I even like the idea of, oh, someone's going to break through the front door and $5 wrench attack you. Okay, well, I've actually got a wallet that's super long term that you actually cannot access this without at least 24 hours worth of work because you're going to have to travel somewhere to get it. But you might have a smaller account that's like, okay, look, I want to get my kids back. Here's some Bitcoin. Whatever works for you. But you're going to buy the hardware wallet. You're going to write down the seed phrase. You're going to store it safely. And then you think, okay, done. But the point is that's only part of the picture. And you might have the keys, but can you independently recover the wallet without the provider? And in all cases, these designers, the designers of these products have thought about this, right? Like they often are true Bitcoiners themselves and think about custody in a way that's extremely advanced. And like, if I was me and I was buying this product, what happens if Trezor disappeared tomorrow? What happened if Unchained disappears tomorrow? What happens if Thea disappears tomorrow? Well, they've got backup plans and you need to go and study them. And this is the point of asking this question. Could you recover your Bitcoin without your provider? And so what information do you need to have in hand to rebuild this wallet if Thea's disappeared? And it might be that you need to download some software. It might need that you have some wallet descriptions, some XPubs, some derivation paths. You might have to contact some kind of coordination service. You might have to have a specific device that's actually compatible with this. And for sure, you'll want some documentation that explains how to do it. And so, yes, you might well have protected your keys in a suitable manner, but have you asked this question? Could you recover your Bitcoin without your provider? And I think far fewer people have actually tested that. And that gap, that's where the risk lies. And so it's extremely unlikely, like I said at the start of this podcast, like what are the chances of the provider of the multisig platform that I've been using disappears tomorrow? That's already very low. But even if that did happen, could you definitely get hold of your Bitcoin? And this is a question I asked myself 5 years ago before I made some major decisions where I was like, okay, I really want to move into Bitcoin in a major way. But to do so, I have to be confident that I've got this custody piece set up so that if, heaven forbid, the worst thing happened, like my dad one day, he woke up, he walked out the house and he fucking died. And he didn't expect that to happen that day. And so if that happens to you as a Bitcoin owner, are you confident that your family can get hold of it? And so you've got to ask this like multi-tiered level of questions. And so it's like, what is the risk? So let me give it a description. It's a provider dependency. And so like in the last episode, I was talking about Bitcoin dependency. It's this idea that your Bitcoin is dependent on you because you're the password manager, you're the treasure map, you're the wallet configurator, whatever the case might be. If you're not around, then your Bitcoin is dependent on you. And this is a slightly different twist. It's like, okay, well, it's provider dependency. Have you figured out how you'll access this Bitcoin if that provider is not there? And so it's not a criticism, okay? You've got Unchained, Nunchuck, Thea, Casa. They're excellent products. But it's not necessarily a question of whether the provider is good. It's actually just a case of, does your plan survive without them? And thankfully, it's actually not too difficult to set up a situation where you can be confident the answer is yes. So ask yourself, like, if this company disappeared tomorrow and I stopped, like their support stops responding, or the software changed, or whatever, or the ownership of the business changes, or the regulations change, like Unchained, for example, they do not open accounts in Australia any longer. Okay, well, what does that mean? Could you still recover your Bitcoin? Now, if you can't, you have a provider dependency. That's what we've just highlighted. So I had a friend recently tell me that their ledger died in a 2 of 3 multisig. It's like, oof, what happens? Well, you've suddenly got 2 of 2. Now, you need both of those keys to work to move the funds to a new wallet with a new set of hardware devices to make them 2 of 3 again. And, in that sense, you had a device dependency, right? It's the same class of problem. You're like, there's multiple different ways you got to think about this, essentially. And in some ways it's learned by doing, but getting hold of this information in advance of the situation is crucial. Like, this is not a problem for tomorrow, it's a problem for today. Like it or not, people die, and estates are already being settled, and the lawyers don't know what they're talking about when they're reading about Bitcoin self-custody. They've certainly never written wills, or most of them have never written a will with Bitcoin in it. And it's actually funny, like, in my opinion, if you don't have the keys, you don't have the Bitcoin. It doesn't matter what the will says. So in some ways, your Bitcoin inheritance plan is more important than your will. And yes, okay, there might be some kind of legal process that could happen afterwards, but if someone gets hold of that Bitcoin that's not supposed to, and you cannot, like, what if you can't get it back from them, basically? So very, very important to get this right. Now, here's another angle that's important to keep in mind. So a friend recently messaged me, and they had a Sparrow wallet. Now, this story is bigger than what I'm going to expand into today, because it's got stuff to do with an app store and, blah, blah, blah. That's not the point of this story, but they got a notification to say that there was an update due on the Sparrow software. And instead of being like, sure, click, yes, barely read the small print, carry on, they messaged me and said, by the way, what do you think I should do? And that's actually the correct instinct, because often a software update isn't necessary in order for you to still access your Bitcoin. But what if it is? And what does it mean in terms of the software upgrade? And actually, you've got to think about this properly before just clicking yes. And so most people will just blindly trust the software update. Thankfully, they didn't. And therefore, it's like, okay, maybe you have to verify the signatures again, or maybe you've got to think through, okay, what is the derivation path of this updated software if it means the wallet has changed? This is just very, very important, because you're actually thinking about the dependency that's going on. And so, yeah, there's so much to this, right? Now, forgive me, I've lost my part here, but yeah, so where, if you trust the software, that's okay, but the question becomes, like, do you trust the provider? Do you trust the interface? Do you trust the software? It's this sense of trust that you have to be careful of. It's like, okay, this was actually creating problems for me. And so to summarize, like, a provider of a Bitcoin self-custody tech stack was messaging someone with their Bitcoin stored using their tech, saying you need to upgrade the software. And when that happens, don't just blindly click go. You go, okay, what are you changing it to and why? And how would that potentially impact my family Bitcoin plan, my inheritance plan? Another angle to this, we kind of touched on this earlier, it's the idea of regulation. So here in Australia, as of the 1st of July, there's a body called AUSTRAC, and they are regulating the crypto exchanges. And every Australian crypto exchange has to collect and share sender and recipient details on every transfer. And so exchanges are already jumping in and saying, okay, is this going to a personal wallet or another exchange? And again, without going into the weeds on this one, like the Sparrow software update, the point is the playing field is always evolving. And in this case, it's a regulatory change. And the players in the market, the stakeholders that you're involved with, they have to operate within the remit of their playing field. And that means they're going to start asking more questions about where you're sending your Bitcoin to. Now, if you've already got Bitcoin in self-custody, is this a big deal? In my opinion, it's not. So don't worry about that. It doesn't need to reflect on your inheritance plan. But if you're about to move capital from the old system into the new, you've got to think about which banking rails to use. You've got to think about which crypto exchange to use. You've got to think about where you're going to actually send it. It's quite a treacherous process. And once you get to Bitcoin self-custody, you're like, come on, like what a place to get to. It's this huge sense of peace, in my opinion. But beware regulatory updates, because they will potentially impact how you've got your Bitcoin stored, and or how to add to it, and or how to sell it or move it if you wanted to. The obvious workaround for me in relation to these AUSTRAC rules is, and I think this is the case, that if you're sending Bitcoin from a crypto exchange in Australia to your own wallet, you literally just have to click drop-down menu, own wallet, and that's it. Now, once it's got to that wallet, you can obviously send it wherever you like. There's then a whole nother debate on CoinJoin and the legality or illegality of that. But think of an old Western, and the guys are the getaway cowboys, and they jump down from their horse and they get a twig and they scrub their tracks out and they jump on the horse and then put it through the lake and then, ride up over the mountain and no one can find them. The ability to do that with Bitcoin using CoinJoin tools is already here, and it makes it extraordinarily costly to track funds. Now, of course, the financial surveillance that exists in today's world that's been completely normalized and monetized doesn't like that. And you'll see more and more and more people being clamped down on for creating technology and tools that do that. That it's still possible. And Bitcoin was designed as a peer-to-peer cash, permissionless, and you can be your own bank. So I see countries becoming more and more regulatorily burdensome. That's a very likely trend. But equally, the way that Bitcoin functions, I'm not too fussed about that. Now, to continue on this idea of like, could you recover your Bitcoin without your provider? Like, have you run a recovery test? And I think that's actually a very important thing to do, right? You might have done it, but has your missus done it? Or your partner done it? Or your eldest child that's going to be in charge of this process done it? Have you gone through the process yourself and made sure that it all works? Do you have every piece of recovery information documented and readily available for the person that might need it? Like, remember, if you've disappeared, they're going to be grieving. They'll be very emotional. Like, figuring things out intellectually is not going to be top of the list. They want to obviously make sure that all these funds are accessible and usable. And so I challenge you, like, have you actually tested the recovery end to end? And, does the person that needs to know, like, where is all the information that they've got to get hold of? And back to the point before about the constantly moving goalposts, the regulatory changes or the software changes, will these instructions still be valid in 10 years' time? And that's a really important one, right? The concept of stress testing into the future. And I myself, like I mentioned already in this podcast, I didn't have a derivation path written down for a particular vault that I created. You're like, shit, that shouldn't have happened, and I need to fix it. And so the point, it's a constantly evolving and important process to go through. So the instructions that you create to solve these problems, they need to work years from now, not just today. And they need to work now because it's a problem for today, not like I said, my dad, he didn't expect to die that day. You don't want to suddenly be hoping that this is all in place the moment something terrible happens. And so to kind of like zoom out a little bit, I just want to spend a small bit of time here discussing the difference between what I am focused on and a provider. So when I call myself a Bitcoin custody architect, this is a job role that provides a service, which is Bitcoin custody architecture. And I think that there'll be many, many, many people in the world that provide this type of thing in the years to come. But you essentially need to sit higher up and take a more bird's eye, more holistic view of the entire playing field. And so if someone was to come to me and say, Jake, how should I own Bitcoin? I've got a ton of questions I would ask them about, like where they're at in their life, what their exposure levels are, why they want to own Bitcoin, and the type of custody option that they go for as a result will be different. And like mentioned before, it's on a scale. Do you want to own it just on an exchange? Do you want to own it as an ETF? Do you want to own it as a Bitcoin treasury company? Do you want to own it in a single sig, in a multi-sig, with collaborative custody, with insurance? There's lots of different things to consider. But the point being is, as an architect, you create the designs, but you're not the builder. In fact, as the designer, you can look at 3 different builders and be like, actually, this is probably the right builder for this particular project. And then that builder's job is to fulfill on the designs. And so the architect lives or sits like a layer above, and they ask the question first and foremost, is this the right solution? What are the trade-offs? What are the dependencies? And what happens if the provider disappears? So if the builder goes bankrupt and cannot carry on with the job or doesn't finish the job, what happens? And so that the analogy there being like, if Unchained disappeared tomorrow, what are you going to do? If Fair disappeared tomorrow, what are you going to do? If Anchorwatch disappears tomorrow, what are you going to do? If Casa disappears tomorrow, what are you going to do? If Coinbase disappears tomorrow, what are you going to do? If iBit disappears, do you know what I mean? The list is endless. The point is, ask that question. And so it's not a case of choosing between a provider and an architect. In some cases, you might need both. In some cases, you might just need one or the other. One provides the tools, the other helps design the system. And so the family Bitcoin plan, which is the output of the Bitcoin custody architecture that I will provide, is the tool that sits above. It is the treasure map in a sense. It's like, okay, this is how this all fits together and is how I remove my dependency. So that you want to be removing the provider dependency, of course, like we've discussed in this whole episode, and also you as the user, the individual holding the Bitcoin. And so let me wrap this up. Episode 126, I asked the question, could your family recover your Bitcoin without you? And today's question is, could you recover your Bitcoin without your provider? They're different, but they're both very, very important. And if you haven't asked them with enough depth, if you haven't asked them with enough sophistication, if you haven't asked them with enough what happens if this goes wrong? What happens if this goes wrong? What happens if this goes wrong? And I've been guilty of not doing this enough myself. Then you could get into some really, really hot water that you don't want to even consider. And so going back to that thread, like I'm sure I can find another one. Like, Bart Roberts, I've paid my dues in the worrying department. Now I go days, weeks, and sometimes months without thinking about it at all. And then sometimes it pops up on Twitter, but without the social prompts, it doesn't even factor in my day-to-day life. So that's someone who solved this problem. But like, I've paid my dues in the worrying department. They felt this, right? Oh God, let me find another one because there's just too many. Oh, now I'm not going to be able to find anything useful. Someone says, this is a rhetorical question, right? Because the answer is so obvious, isn't it? Excuse me, that wasn't actually a very useful aside because I didn't find anything. But let me continue to wrap the episode up. So if you've been studying Bitcoin, you have to ask the question, what is money? And that takes you down a long, brilliant, wonderful rabbit hole that helps you understand economics, helps you understand the history of money, helps you understand why Bitcoin is important. So why Bitcoin? What is it? When should I buy it? How should I buy it? Many people have spent hours and hours and hours thinking about these problems, thinking about these questions. And where I'm trying to sit and where I am highlighting we all need to consider is like, what happens if you're no longer around? So there's a whole additional step or layer of sophistication, shall we say, that should be considered when taking a Bitcoin position, such that if you're no longer around or your provider is no longer around, your Bitcoin is accessible. So if your family can't recover your Bitcoin without you, you've got Bitcoin dependency. If you cannot recover your Bitcoin without your provider, you have a provider dependency. And both must be taken very seriously. So let me close this out. Have a look at my website. I'll pop it in the show notes, jakewoodhouse.io/BCA for more details on what Bitcoin custody architecture is and the current offer that I have out to help people with this problem. It's something I've lived myself. It's a feeling that many, many people the world over, as per this set of comments on this tweet that I put out, shows you that it's just a horrible feeling. But God, it feels great when you actually solve it. So thanks so much for your time today. Really hope you enjoyed the podcast, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.